The moment someone believes they are above the law is often the moment the truth quietly walks through the door. The fluorescent lights inside the Brookhaven Police Department hummed softly as the afternoon settled into an ordinary rhythm that no one would remember. At least that was what every officer inside believed. Phones rang. Keyboards clicked. A television mounted high in the waiting area quietly repeated local traffic updates while citizens waited patiently for routine paperwork and simple questions to be answered. Nothing about the scene suggested that within minutes the station itself would become the center of a federal operation unlike anything its officers had ever experienced. Vanessa Brooks sat calmly in one of the mold plastic chairs near the front desk, dressed in a navy business suit beneath a light gray trench coat, her posture composed, her expression unreadable. Resting securely in both hands was a thick manila envelope sealed with multiple federal markings. Across the front, in bold black letters, were the word sealed federal warrant followed by additional legal language instructing that the contents were to remain unopened except by the specifically authorized federal recipient. Vanessa never looked away from the envelope for long. She checked it the way someone checks something that carries responsibility rather than value. She was not nervous. She was simply determined to complete the assignment exactly as instructed. Officer Daniel Hayes noticed her almost immediately. 34 years old, respected by many co-workers for being decisive, Daniel believed hesitation created problems. Quick decisions solved them. He stepped away from the patrol counter and approached with the confidence of someone convinced he could read people before they ever spoke. His eye settled not on Vanessa's face but on the unusual envelope resting in her hands. "What is inside?" he asked. Vanessa answered politely. "Federal documents that must be delivered unopened." Daniel extended his hand. "Let me see it." Without argument, Vanessa offered the envelope. She made no sudden movements. She raised no objection. She simply watched. Daniel examined the exterior carefully before letting out a short laugh. "Sealed," he repeated. "Inside my station." Several officers glanced toward them with quiet curiosity. Vanessa remained perfectly calm. "Officer, please return it. It is protected federal property and must remain sealed." Daniel looked directly into her eyes, convinced her calmness was an act designed to hide something more interesting than paperwork. "Nobody tells me what I can or cannot open inside my own department." Before anyone nearby could respond, he slipped one finger beneath the sealed edge and deliberately tore the envelope open. The sound was surprisingly soft, yet it seemed to echo through the entire lobby. Vanessa did not gasp. She did not argue. She simply lowered her eyes for one brief moment before looking back at Daniel with quiet disappointment rather than anger. "You should not have done that," she said gently. Daniel removed several pages, scanning only the first lines without understanding their legal significance. "Looks like paperwork to me," he replied with a dismissive smile. At that exact moment, the dispatcher's radio crackled with unusual urgency. "Attention all units inside headquarters," the voice announced. "Multiple federal sport utility vehicles have entered the parking lot. Occupants identify themselves as United States Marshals requesting immediate access." Every conversation inside the station stopped. Daniel slowly lifted his head toward the front windows. Through the glass, black government vehicles rolled silently into position one after another with disciplined precision. Men and women wearing jackets marked United States Marshals stepped out together, moving with calm purpose instead of panic. Vanessa remained seated exactly where she had been all along. She quietly folded her hands together and looked toward the entrance as though she had been expecting this moment from the very beginning. One marshal spoke into a radio while approaching the front doors. His voice carried clearly enough for everyone standing nearby to hear. "Lock the station down." 1 hour earlier, long before black government vehicles entered the police station parking lot and before anyone questioned the envelope resting quietly in her hands, Vanessa Brooks stood inside the federal courthouse annex on the 7th floor overlooking downtown Brookhaven. Morning sunlight stretched across polished marble floors while attorneys, investigators, and federal employees moved through secured hallways with practiced efficiency. The building carried none of the noise found inside a busy police station. Conversations remained measured, Doors opened only after electronic credentials were verified. Every step reminded visitors that certain responsibilities demanded absolute precision. Vanessa adjusted the sleeve of her Navy business suit as Deputy United States Marshal Rebecca Collins approached carrying a locked evidence case. Rebecca had spent more than 2 decades protecting witnesses, transporting sensitive evidence, and executing federal court orders. Experience had taught her that the greatest risks often appeared during the simplest assignments because people underestimated paperwork more easily than obvious displays of authority. She unlocked the case, removed a thick manila envelope, and carefully placed it on the conference table between them. Several official seals crossed every opening, accompanied by bright warning labels identifying the contents as protected federal documents. Vanessa studied each marking without touching the envelope. Rebecca finally spoke. Everything inside has already been documented through the federal chain of custody. Your responsibility begins the moment you accept possession. Vanessa nodded quietly. Who is authorized to receive it? Rebecca slid a single sheet across the table listing one specific federal recipient and one specific location. Only the individual named here. No substitutions. No exceptions. If anyone asks to inspect it, you politely refuse. If anyone attempts to open it, you immediately stop handling the package and document everything you observe. Vanessa looked at the sealed envelope once more. Even local law enforcement. Rebecca answered without hesitation. Especially local law enforcement if they are not listed in the authorization. The room became silent for a moment before Rebecca continued, speaking in a calmer voice. Most officers understand these procedures. Occasionally someone believes curiosity gives them authority. It does not. The seal protects more than paper. It protects the integrity of an entire federal investigation. Vanessa accepted the envelope with both hands, treating it less like a package and more like a promise. She signed the transfer documentation, verified the identification numbers printed across the security labels, and placed the envelope inside a weather-resistant document carrier without disturbing a single seal. Rebecca walked with her toward the secure elevator. You will travel alone, she explained. No escort. We intentionally keep the transfer routine. The less attention it attracts, the better. Vanessa smiled faintly. Routine has a way of changing without warning. Rebecca returned the smile. That is why we prepare for every possibility instead of expecting the best one. Minutes later, Vanessa stepped outside into the crisp autumn air. Government buildings reflected the bright morning sky while commuters crossed intersections carrying coffee and briefcases, completely unaware that an ordinary-looking document passing quietly through their city represented months of confidential federal work. Vanessa placed the carrier securely inside her vehicle before beginning the short drive toward Brookhaven Police Department. She never exceeded the speed limit. She never answered unnecessary phone calls. At every stoplight she instinctively glanced toward the document resting beside her, confirming that every seal remained untouched. She had completed assignments like this before, but something about today's instructions lingered in her thoughts. Rebecca's final words echoed repeatedly in her mind. Protect the process, and the process will protect the truth. Vanessa could not have known that before the hour ended, someone inside the very station she was approaching would decide that a sealed federal warrant was nothing more than an envelope waiting to be opened. While Vanessa Brooks drove steadily toward the Brookhaven Police Department with the sealed federal warrant resting securely inside its weather-resistant document carrier, Officer Daniel Hayes was finishing what he considered another frustrating shift that seemed determined to test his patience. The morning had begun with a series of minor calls that accomplished little except consuming time. A noise complaint had turned out to be a misunderstanding between neighbors. A reported suspicious vehicle belonged to a delivery driver whose paperwork was completely valid. A store owner had insisted someone attempted to pass counterfeit money, only to discover the bill was genuine after careful examination. Each incident reinforced Daniel's growing belief that people wasted police resources with unnecessary concerns. Inside the squad room, several officers gathered around a briefing board while Sergeant Luis Ortega reviewed updates from surrounding jurisdictions. Stay alert, Ortega reminded everyone. Federal agencies have increased activity throughout the county this week. If something unusual comes across your desk, slow down and verify before making assumptions. Coordination matters? Daniel nodded politely, but his attention drifted toward his coffee rather than the briefing itself. He had heard similar reminders countless times before. Experience, he believed, mattered more than caution. Most situations are exactly what they look like, he quietly remarked to another officer after the meeting ended. People usually tell on themselves before you even ask questions. The other officer shrugged without responding. Daniel collected his patrol reports and headed toward the front lobby to complete routine paperwork before returning to field duty. That was when he noticed Vanessa entering through the station doors. She walked with calm confidence, carrying a structured document case close to her side. She did not appear hurried. She did not appear nervous. She simply approached the reception counter with the quiet focus of someone intending to complete a straightforward task. Daniel observed her from several yards away. His eyes settled almost immediately on the document carrier rather than the woman holding it. Something about the careful way she handled it caught his attention. Instead of considering that the item might require special handling, his mind reached a different conclusion. Why would someone carry an unusually protected package into a local police station without first identifying herself? The question lingered only briefly before it became an assumption. Daniel stepped away from his desk and positioned himself near the reception area before Vanessa reached the counter. "Good afternoon," he said. "Can I help you with something?" Vanessa returned the greeting with the same respectful tone she had used throughout her morning. "Yes, officer. I have official federal documents that must be delivered directly to the authorized recipient listed on the transfer instructions." Daniel extended his hand slightly. "Let me take a look first." Vanessa answered without hesitation. "I am sorry, but I cannot release the package to anyone who is not listed as the authorized recipient." Her words remained polite, professional, and completely consistent with the instructions she had received less than an hour earlier. Daniel interpreted them differently. Instead of hearing procedure, he heard resistance. Instead of recognizing protocol, he sensed concealment. A receptionist quietly glanced between them before returning to her computer, sensing the conversation becoming more serious than an ordinary visitor interaction. Daniel folded his arms. Everything that enters this building can be inspected. Vanessa met his gaze without raising her voice. Federal transfer procedures require that the sealed warrant remain unopened until it reaches the designated individual. Daniel noticed neither uncertainty nor fear in her expression. He saw only calm confidence, and for reasons he could not fully explain, that confidence challenged his own. Somewhere beyond the front entrance, unnoticed by everyone inside the lobby, several black government sport utility vehicles had already turned onto the street leading toward the station, moving with quiet precision while the distance between routine procedure and irreversible consequences became shorter with every passing second. Vanessa Brooks did not move from the reception counter. She had completed enough federal assignments to understand that patience often prevented misunderstandings from becoming larger problems. Keeping both hands visible, she rested the protected document carrier gently on the counter without releasing it. "Officer," she said in an even voice, "the transfer instructions are very specific. The sealed warrant must be delivered directly to the authorized federal recipient. I am not permitted to surrender it to anyone else." Daniel Hayes listened, but his confidence had already become certainty. In his mind, no legitimate document should be beyond the inspection of a police officer standing inside his own department. He glanced at the carrier again, noticing the multiple security seals and official markings. Instead of recognizing those markings as evidence of strict federal procedure, he interpreted them as unnecessary obstacles placed in front of him. "You are inside a police station now," he replied. "If you have nothing to hide, there should not be any problem with letting me verify what you are carrying." Vanessa remained composed. Verification can be completed by contacting the federal office listed on the transfer instructions. Opening the warrant is not authorized. Several people waiting in the lobby quietly watched the exchange without interrupting. The receptionist stopped typing for a moment before pretending to focus on her computer again. Officer Emily Parker, who had been organizing reports a few feet away, looked toward the conversation after hearing the repeated mention of a sealed federal warrant. She approached calmly, not to take control, but to better understand what was happening. "Daniel," she said quietly, "if it is federal property, maybe we should confirm the procedure before handling it." Daniel barely turned his head. "It will only take a second." Emily studied the bright warning labels crossing the envelope inside the partially open document carrier. She had attended joint training sessions involving federal agencies and remembered repeated instructions emphasizing chain of custody. "Those seals are there for a reason," she said carefully. "There is probably a contact number somewhere on the paperwork or on the exterior." Vanessa nodded. "There is. I would be happy to provide the information." Instead of accepting the offer, Daniel extended his hand again. "Give me the envelope." Vanessa hesitated only because the instructions she had accepted less than an hour earlier echoed clearly in her memory. "Protect the process, and the process will protect the truth." She slowly lifted the sealed envelope from the carrier without breaking eye contact. "Officer, I respectfully ask that you do not open it." Daniel accepted the envelope, turning it over as if searching for hidden compartments or unusual weight. The paper felt ordinary. The seals appeared ordinary. Nothing about it matched the importance Vanessa seemed to attach to it, and that only strengthened his assumption that she was exaggerating. Emily stepped closer. "Daniel, seriously, let us make one phone call first." He answered with a short smile that suggested the situation was already settled in his mind. "We are making this more complicated than it needs to be." Vanessa watched quietly. There was no anger in her face, only growing concern that procedure was beginning to give way to personal judgment. Around them, the station continued operating as usual. Dispatchers answered calls. Officers walked through the hallway carrying case files. A printer hummed in a nearby office. Everything felt routine, yet the atmosphere around the reception counter had changed. Outside, unnoticed by nearly everyone inside the building, the first black government sport utility vehicle rolled silently into the visitor parking area, followed by another, then another, each stopping with deliberate precision as uniformed federal personnel prepared to enter without haste, unaware that the decision which would soon change the entire afternoon had already been made inside the lobby. Officer Emily Parker watched Daniel Hayes rotate the sealed envelope in his hands, hoping he would reconsider before crossing a line that every federal training seminar had warned officers never to cross. She recognized the warning labels, the serial numbers, and the multiple evidence seals placed with deliberate precision across every opening. They were not decorative markings. They represented documented custody, legal accountability, and procedures designed to protect investigations that often stretched across several jurisdictions. "Daniel," she said one final time, keeping her voice calm enough that the growing audience in the lobby would not sense her concern, "please call the number printed on the authorization label first. It will only take a minute." Daniel glanced briefly at the contact information but lowered the envelope before making any attempt to use it. "If this is legitimate, there is nothing inside that I cannot verify myself." Vanessa Brooks remained remarkably composed. She had encountered skepticism before during federal assignments, but never from someone standing only seconds away from making a decision with consequences that could not easily be undone. "Officer," she replied respectfully, "the purpose of the seal is to preserve the chain of custody. Once it is broken without authorization, that action becomes part of the official record." Daniel answered with quiet confidence rather than anger. "Then the official record will show that I verified what entered this building." The word settled heavily over the reception area. Emily exchanged a quick glance with the receptionist, who instinctively stopped answering the ringing telephone for just a moment before returning to her duties. A retired couple waiting to file a neighborhood report quietly observed the conversation without speaking. Another patrol officer passing through the lobby slowed his pace, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. Daniel placed one thumb beneath the reinforced security flap and looked directly at Vanessa. "Last chance," he said. "Tell me why this should stay sealed." Vanessa did not argue. She simply answered with complete honesty. "Because the law requires it." For a brief second, silence filled the lobby. Then came the soft, unmistakable sound of heavy paper separating as Daniel deliberately tore through the federal security seal. The noise itself was almost insignificant, yet Emily immediately closed her eyes for the briefest moment, realizing the decision could not be reversed. Daniel removed the documents and scanned only the opening pages. Dense legal language, federal court references, and restricted distribution notices covered nearly every line. Without the accompanying case background, the material appeared confusing rather than informative. "Looks like ordinary legal paperwork," he said dismissively, lowering the pages without recognizing their significance. Vanessa never reached for the documents. She simply looked at the broken seal still hanging from the torn envelope and quietly said, "You have documented your own decision." Daniel frowned, uncertain what she meant. Before anyone could respond, the dispatcher's voice echoed sharply across the station through the internal communication system. "Attention command staff. Multiple federal vehicles have arrived outside headquarters. Repeat, multiple federal vehicles are requesting immediate access." Conversations throughout the building stopped almost instantly. Officers stepped into the hallway. Administrative employees looked up from computer screens. Chief Harold Bennett emerged from his office with a puzzled expression, clearly unaware that anything involving federal authorities had been scheduled that afternoon. Daniel instinctively turned toward the front windows. Outside, several black sport utility vehicles had parked with remarkable precision across the front entrance. Men and women wearing jackets clearly marked United States Marshals exited in coordinated formation, carrying folders instead of urgency, their calm professionalism making the scene feel even more serious. Vanessa slowly folded her hands together and looked toward the entrance without surprise. Her expression remained steady, almost compassionate, as if she understood that the next few minutes would change far more than anyone inside the station yet realized. The front doors opened with deliberate calm rather than urgency, and the first person to step inside wore a dark jacket bearing bright gold letters that read United States Marshals. Deputy United States Marshal Rebecca Collins entered with measured confidence, followed by several federal personnel who quietly positioned themselves throughout the lobby without raising their voices or disrupting anyone waiting for service. Their movements reflected careful planning instead of intimidation. Chief Harold Bennett immediately walked forward, extending his hand in professional greeting. "I am Chief Bennett. How can we assist you today?" Rebecca accepted the greeting politely before presenting her federal credentials. "Chief Bennett, thank you for your cooperation. Effective immediately, this facility is under temporary federal evidence preservation procedures. Until we complete an initial review, no documents, recordings, or evidence related to the current incident are to leave this building." The word settled over the station with remarkable weight. Officers who had been walking through the hallway quietly stopped where they stood. Dispatchers looked toward the lobby through the glass partition separating their communication center from the front desk. Daniel Hayes remained motionless beside the reception counter, still holding the partially opened envelope and several loose pages whose significance he had never fully understood. Rebecca's eyes immediately found the broken federal seal hanging from the torn edge. She did not raise her voice. She did not display anger. Instead, she asked one simple question. "Who opened the sealed federal warrant?" For several seconds, nobody answered. The silence itself seemed louder than any accusation could have been. Emily Parker slowly looked toward Daniel before lowering her eyes. Chief Bennett glanced from the damaged envelope to the federal agent standing behind Rebecca, recognizing that something far more serious than a routine misunderstanding had unfolded inside his station. Daniel finally stepped forward. "I opened it," he said. "I believed I was conducting a lawful inspection." Rebecca nodded once, acknowledging his statement without judgment. "Thank you for your honesty. Please place every document back inside the envelope exactly as they are now and set it on the reception counter. Do not rearrange the pages." Daniel carefully followed the instruction. For the first time that afternoon, uncertainty began replacing confidence. Rebecca approached the counter and examined the damaged seal without touching it. She quietly photographed the envelope from several angles before another marshal documented the condition of the papers. Every movement followed an organized process that suggested this was not about blame but about preserving facts exactly as they existed. Vanessa Brooks remained seated nearby, her hands folded calmly in her lap. Rebecca briefly turned toward her. "Ms. Brooks, were you able to maintain custody of the warrant until it was taken from you?" Vanessa answered with complete clarity. "Yes. I followed every transfer instruction exactly as directed." Rebecca nodded appreciatively before recording the response. Chief Bennett watched the exchange carefully, realizing that every question focused on procedure rather than personal opinion. He turned toward Daniel with visible concern. "Did anyone advise you not to open it?" Before Daniel could answer, Emily spoke honestly. "Yes, Chief. I recommended contacting the federal number listed on the authorization label before handling the warrant." Daniel closed his eyes briefly, replaying the conversation in his mind. He remembered every warning, every opportunity to pause, and every assumption that had convinced him he already knew the answer. Outside, additional federal personnel quietly secured the building entrances while allowing employees and visitors to remain calm inside. No one rushed. No one argued. The station itself had become part of the official record, and every passing minute preserved another piece of the truth. Rebecca finally looked directly at Daniel, her voice remaining steady and professional. "Officer Hayes, this review is not beginning because someone delivered a federal warrant today. It is beginning because someone decided established procedure did not apply to him. That distinction will matter before this day is over." The atmosphere inside the Brookhaven Police Department had changed so completely that even the familiar sounds of ringing telephones and computer keyboards seemed distant. Every conversation had given way to careful observation as Deputy United States Marshal Rebecca Collins continued documenting the damaged federal warrant with quiet precision. No one hurried her because no one questioned who now directed the process. Chief Harold Bennett stood beside the reception counter with his hands folded, watching each step unfold while recognizing that authority was no longer measured by rank displayed on a local uniform but by adherence to established law. Daniel Hayes remained where he had admitted opening the sealed warrant, his confidence fading with every instruction the federal team carried out. He had expected questions. He had not expected a lesson in procedure so methodical that every movement exposed the consequences of a single decision. Rebecca accepted a tablet from another marshal and reviewed the electronic chain of custody. Every transfer, every signature, every timestamp appeared exactly where it belonged until the sequence reached Brookhaven Police Department. There the uninterrupted record stopped with one simple notation identifying an unauthorized opening before delivery to the designated recipient. Rebecca looked toward Vanessa Brooks. "Ms. Brooks, for the official record, did you at any point authorize anyone to open the warrant?" Vanessa answered calmly. "No. My instructions were to deliver it unopened to the federal recipient identified on the transfer order." Rebecca entered the response without comment before addressing the room. The chain of custody existed to protect both the investigation and every professional involved in it. Those procedures are not suggestions. They preserve trust in the legal process. Chief Bennett slowly nodded, understanding that the explanation was directed as much toward his department as toward the written record. Daniel finally spoke, his voice noticeably quieter than before. "I believed I had the authority to inspect anything brought into this building." Rebecca met his eyes without hostility. "Authority always exists within limits, Officer Hayes. Every agency has jurisdiction. Every jurisdiction has boundaries. Professional judgment begins by recognizing where those boundaries exist." Emily Parker remained silent, but Daniel remembered her repeated recommendation to verify the federal instructions before acting. The memory weighed more heavily now than any criticism could have. Another marshal approached Rebecca carrying preliminary documentation collected from security cameras, lobby recordings, and dispatch logs. Rebecca reviewed the timestamps before turning toward Chief Bennett once again. "Chief, based on the evidence presently available, we have no indication that Ms. Brooks violated any procedure. On the contrary, the documentation shows repeated efforts to preserve federal protocol despite multiple opportunities to abandon it." Chief Bennett looked toward Vanessa with genuine respect. Ms. Brooks, on behalf of this department, I appreciate the professionalism you demonstrated under difficult circumstances. Vanessa acknowledged the statement with a slight nod. Professional standards only matter when we continue following them after someone else stops following theirs. The words settled over the lobby with quiet force. They were not spoken as an accusation. They sounded more like a reminder that integrity depended upon consistency rather than convenience. Daniel lowered his eyes, realizing that throughout the entire encounter Vanessa had never raised her voice, never challenged anyone personally, and never abandoned the rules she had been trusted to uphold. Rebecca carefully placed the damaged warrant inside a new evidence container specifically designed to preserve compromised materials before sealing it with fresh documentation. The investigation itself will continue, she explained. Today's events have created an additional administrative matter, but they have not erased the truth already documented elsewhere. For the first time since entering the station, Daniel understood that the pages he had casually dismissed as ordinary paperwork represented only one piece of something much larger, and the greatest mistake he had made was not misunderstanding a document but believing that confidence could replace procedure when the law demanded both patience and humility. By late afternoon, the activity inside the Brookhaven Police Department no longer resembled an ordinary workday. Every significant event had been carefully documented, every relevant recording preserved, and every decision connected to the damaged federal warrant had become part of an official administrative review. Deputy United States Marshal Rebecca Collins gathered the completed evidence log while another federal investigator verified the timestamps collected from lobby surveillance cameras, dispatch recordings, and body camera footage. None of the documentation relied on opinion because every important moment had already been captured by procedure itself. Chief Harold Bennett quietly reviewed the preliminary timeline alongside Rebecca, reading each entry with increasing concern. The sequence was remarkably straightforward. Vanessa Brooks arrived with a properly sealed federal warrant. She identified her purpose. She explained the delivery restrictions. She offered verification through the authorized federal contact information. Officer Emily Parker recommended confirming the procedure before taking further action. Despite each opportunity to pause, Officer Daniel Hayes chose to rely on his personal judgment instead of the established process. Chief Bennett slowly lowered the report and looked toward Daniel. "This review is not about making one mistake," he said in a measured voice. "Every professional makes mistakes. The question is whether those mistakes happen after ignoring repeated opportunities to follow procedure." Daniel listened without attempting to defend himself. Earlier that day he had believed confidence demonstrated leadership. Now he understood that real leadership often began by accepting that another agency possessed authority he did not. Rebecca closed the evidence folder before addressing everyone gathered near the reception area. "For the record, the federal investigation connected to this warrant remains secure because duplicate documentation and independent judicial records exist. The investigation itself has not been compromised. However, the unauthorized opening of the sealed warrant created a separate matter requiring review under federal evidence handling standards." A visible sense of relief crossed Chief Bennett's face upon hearing that the larger investigation remained protected, yet that relief did not erase the responsibility resting inside his own department. He turned toward Vanessa. "Brooks. Ms. Brooks, I owe you an apology. You followed every instruction given to you, and this department should have shown the same level of professionalism in return." Vanessa accepted the apology with quiet grace. Accountability matters because public trust depends on it. The law protects everyone only when every person inside the system agrees that procedure is more important than pride. The words settled gently across the room. No one challenged them because the events of the afternoon had already demonstrated their truth. Emily Parker finally spoke after remaining silent through most of the review. "I keep thinking how different today could have been if we had spent 30 seconds making one phone call." Daniel nodded slowly. "You were right. I believed acting quickly proved confidence. Instead, slowing down would have shown better judgment." Rebecca offered a small, respectful nod. Recognizing that difference is where professional growth begins. Outside, the federal vehicles remained parked in orderly formation while investigators completed their final administrative tasks. Inside, employees gradually returned to answering phones and assisting visitors, although the atmosphere felt noticeably different than it had only a few hours earlier. Routine had returned, but perspective had changed. Before leaving, Rebecca handed Chief Bennett a copy of the preservation notice and extended her hand. "Thank you for your cooperation once the review began." The chief accepted the handshake. "We will cooperate fully moving forward." Vanessa picked up her now empty document carrier, preparing to leave the station without celebration or resentment. She had arrived intending only to deliver a sealed warrant. Instead, she had reminded an entire department that respect for the law begins long before a courtroom and long before a judge ever speaks. Sometimes the strongest protection for justice is simply the willingness to follow the rules even when no one believes they need to. 6 months later, the training auditorium at the Brookhaven Regional Law Enforcement Academy was filled with newly hired officers preparing to begin careers that would place extraordinary responsibility in their hands every single day. The room looked much like countless other classrooms across America, with rows of chairs, neatly arranged notebooks, and instructors quietly preparing the morning schedule. Yet one lesson had drawn unusual attention because it did not come from a textbook. It came from an experience that had reminded an entire department why procedure exists in the first place. Chief Harold Bennett stood near the back of the auditorium beside Deputy United States Marshal Rebecca Collins, watching recruits settle into their seats. Among those attending the mandatory professional development session sat Officer Daniel Hayes. The previous months had included extensive retraining focused on interagency cooperation, evidence handling, legal authority, and professional decision-making. Daniel no longer viewed those subjects as routine requirements. He understood that every procedure represented lessons written by people who had already experienced the consequences of ignoring them. When the instructor introduced the guest speaker, the room became completely quiet. Vanessa Brooks walked to the front of the auditorium carrying nothing except a folder containing a few personal notes. She smiled warmly before looking across the audience. "Thank you for allowing me to spend time with you today," she began. "Most people believe trust is created during extraordinary moments. I believe trust is created during ordinary moments when no one is watching." Every recruit listened carefully. Vanessa did not describe anyone as an enemy. She did not speak with bitterness. Instead, she described responsibility as something shared equally by every person who serves the public, regardless of the badge, agency, or title they carry. "The law is strongest," she continued, "when each professional respects not only their own authority but also the lawful responsibilities entrusted to others. Confidence is valuable. Experience is valuable. But neither should ever replace humility." Daniel listened with complete attention, recognizing many of the same words she had spoken months earlier inside the police station. This time he understood them differently because experience had changed him. When the presentation concluded, the instructor invited questions. Before anyone else stood, Daniel slowly rose from his chair. The room became silent once again. Looking directly toward Vanessa, he spoke with calm sincerity. "Ms. Brooks, I cannot change the decision I made that day. I ignored procedure, dismissed advice, and assumed I understood something that I did not. I appreciate the professionalism you showed throughout that situation, and I sincerely apologize." Vanessa looked at him for a quiet moment before offering a gentle smile. "Officer Hayes, accountability is meaningful because it allows people to grow instead of remaining defined by one moment. The important question is never whether someone makes a mistake. The important question is what they choose to become after recognizing it." Several recruits wrote those words into their notebooks. Rebecca Collins quietly exchanged a glance with Chief Bennett, both recognizing that the lesson had reached far beyond one department or one investigation. As the session ended, the recruits filed out of the auditorium carrying more than training materials. They carried a reminder that authority is never measured by how much power a person believes they possess but by how faithfully they honor the limits placed upon that power. Vanessa gathered her folder and walked toward the exit without seeking recognition, while Daniel remained seated for one final moment, reflecting on how one ordinary envelope had changed the course of an entire afternoon and, in many ways, the course of his own career. Because a badge may identify the person entrusted to enforce the law, but integrity is what allows the public to believe that justice truly belongs to everyone.